The blood on Katherine Kane's hands had dried to a rust-brown color by the time she stumbled into Oregon City, Oregon, her borrowed horse wheezing beneath her weight. She had killed a man 3 days prior, not out of malice but out of the desperate will to live, and now she carried that secret like a stone in her chest. It was late September in 1878, and the evening air carried the scent of pine and river water from the Willamette that ran through the settlement. Katherine had been traveling alone for weeks, fleeing a situation back in Sacramento that had turned deadly. The man she killed had been her employer's brother, a cruel creature who had cornered her in the stables with intentions that made her skin crawl. When he lunged, she grabbed the closest weapon, a rusted pitchfork, and drove it forward with all her strength. She watched the light leave his eyes, took his horse and what money she could find, and rode north without looking back. Oregon City was bustling despite the hour, with merchants closing their shops and cowboys meandering between the saloons that lined the main street. Katherine guided her stolen horse toward what appeared to be a livery stable, her body aching from days of hard riding and nights spent sleeping on the cold ground. She wore a dusty traveling dress that had once been a respectable shade of blue, now faded and torn at the hem. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves down her back, and her green eyes darted nervously at every person who passed. The livery stable was run by a broad-shouldered man with sandy hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. He looked to be in his late 20s, with kind brown eyes that assessed her and the horse with equal measure. He wore worn denim trousers, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a leather vest that had seen better days. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow put her at ease despite her frayed nerves. "That horse looks about done in." Katherine dismounted on shaking legs, gripping the saddle to steady herself. "I need to board him. I can pay." The man nodded, taking the reins gently. "Name's Russell Parker. I run this place along with the ranch just outside town. Horse yours?" The question was casual, but Katherine felt her heart skip. She had practiced this lie during the long ride north. Bought him off a trader in Sacramento, needed something sturdy for the journey. Russell's eyes lingered on her face for a moment, and she wondered what he saw there. Guilt, fear, exhaustion. But he simply nodded again and led the horse into the stable. "You got a place to stay?" "Not yet. I just arrived. Mrs. Henley runs a boarding house 2 streets over. Clean rooms, decent meals. Tell her I sent you." He paused, glancing back at her. "You look like you could use both." Katherine felt unexpected tears prick her eyes at this stranger's kindness. She had spent so many days certain that everyone could see what she had done, that her crime was written across her forehead in letters of blood. "Thank you. I appreciate it." Russell emerged from the stable, wiping his hands on his trousers. "You running from something?" The question was direct, without judgment, and Katherine found herself unable to lie to those steady brown eyes. Instead, she said, "Aren't we all?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Fair enough. Welcome to Oregon City, Miss Kane, Katherine Kane." "Welcome, Miss Kane. If you need anything, I'm usually here or at the Parker Ranch about 3 miles west. We raise cattle and horses out there." Katherine nodded, committing the information to memory, though she had no intention of staying long. Oregon City was meant to be a brief stop, a place to rest and resupply before she continued north to Washington Territory or maybe even Canada. She could not afford to put down roots, not with the possibility that someone might come looking for her. Mrs. Henley's boarding house was exactly as Russell had described: clean, modest, and smelling faintly of lavender and fresh bread. The proprietor was a plump woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She took Katherine's money for a week in advance, and showed her to a small room on the second floor with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Supper's at 6, breakfast at 7. No men in the rooms, no noise after 9. You cause trouble, you're out. Understood? Yes, madam. Left alone, Katherine finally allowed herself to collapse onto the bed. Her entire body felt like one enormous bruise, and her mind spun with memories she desperately wanted to forget. The man's face, twisted with rage and then surprise. The sickening resistance of flesh as the pitchfork pierced his chest. The way he had gurgled and clutched at the weapon, blood bubbling between his lips. She had not meant to kill him. She had only meant to stop him, to protect herself. But the law would not see it that way. She was a woman of no standing, an employee in his brother's household, and he had been a man of means and influence. They would call it murder, and they would hang her for it. Katherine sat up and went to the washstand, pouring water from the pitcher into the basin. She scrubbed at her hands even though the blood was long gone, scrubbed until her skin was raw and pink. Then she unpinned her hair and washed her face, trying to wash away the memories along with the trail dust. That night, she dreamed of pitchforks and blood, of being chased through endless forests by faceless men on horseback. She woke gasping in the darkness, her nightgown soaked with sweat, and did not sleep again until dawn began to lighten the sky. The next morning, Katherine ventured out to explore the town and find work. She had enough money to last a few weeks if she was careful, but she needed to replenish her funds before moving on. Oregon City was larger than she had expected, with a population that seemed to be growing by the day. The town had been built where the Willamette River tumbled over a series of falls, and the sound of rushing water provided a constant backdrop to the noise of commerce and daily life. She found work at a dress shop owned by a fastidious woman named Mrs. Crawford, who needed someone with nimble fingers to help with alterations and repairs. Katherine had learned fine needlework from her mother, who had once been a lady's maid in a grand house back east before marrying and moving west. The work was familiar and soothing, requiring concentration that left little room for darker thoughts. Days fell into a routine. Katherine woke early, took breakfast at the boarding house, and spent her days in the dress shop amid bolts of fabric and the whisper of thread through cloth. In the evenings, she returned to her room, took simple suppers alone, and read from a collection of books Mrs. Henley kept in the parlor for boarders. She avoided the saloons and anywhere else that attracted crowds, fearful of drawing attention. But Oregon City was full of newcomers and drifters, people seeking fresh starts or running from old troubles, and one more solitary woman drew little notice. Russell Parker, however, noticed. She encountered him regularly during her walks to and from work, always near the livery stable where he seemed to spend most of his time. He would tip his hat and offer a polite greeting, sometimes a comment about the weather or the state of the roads. Katherine responded with careful courtesy, keeping her distance even as she found herself looking for him during her daily routines. There was something solid about Russell Parker, something steady and trustworthy that drew her like a moth to flame. But Katherine knew she could not afford such feelings. She was a fugitive, a killer, and she would only bring trouble to anyone who got close to her. 3 weeks after her arrival in Oregon City, Russell approached her as she was walking home in the early evening. The autumn air had turned crisp, and leaves were beginning to paint the trees in shades of gold and crimson. "Miss Kane, might I walk with you a ways?" Katherine hesitated, then nodded. It would be rude to refuse, and she could not afford to seem strange or antisocial. Of course. They walked in companionable silence for a block before Russell spoke again. "You settling in all right? Mrs. Henley treating you well?" "Yes, very well, and I found work at Mrs. Crawford's dress shop." "That's good, real good." He cleared his throat, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "There's a church social this Saturday evening. Nothing fancy, just some food and music, chance for folks to gather. I was wondering if you might like to attend. With me, I mean." Catherine's heart clenched. She wanted to say yes, wanted it with a fierce longing that surprised her. But she forced herself to shake her head. "I appreciate the invitation, but I do not think that would be appropriate." "Why not?" The question was gentle but persistent. Catherine searched for an excuse. "We barely know each other." "Well, that is sort of the point of courting, Miss Kane." Getting to know each other. Courting. The word sent a thrill of fear and pleasure through her. "Mr. Parker, I am not looking for courtship. I do not plan to stay in Oregon City long." "Where are you headed?" "I have not decided yet." Russell stopped walking, and Catherine was forced to stop as well. He studied her with those steady brown eyes, and she felt as though he could see straight through to her guilty soul. "You are running from something," he said quietly. "I have seen enough people with that look to recognize it." "I am not asking you to tell me what it is. I am just asking you to come to a church social with me. No pressure, no expectations. Just some food and maybe a dance or two." Catherine wanted to refuse. She should refuse. But the loneliness of the past weeks pressed down on her, and the genuine kindness in Russell's face made her yearn for connection, however brief. "One dance," she heard herself say, "but I cannot make any promises beyond that." Russell's face lit with a smile that transformed him from handsome to devastating. "One dance is all I am asking for right now." The church social was held in a large barn on the edge of town that had been decorated with bunting and lanterns. Long tables groaned under the weight of food brought by the townspeople. Roasted chickens, fresh bread, pies made from the last of the summer berries, and crocks of butter and preserves. A small group of musicians set up in one corner with fiddles, a guitar, and a harmonica, and soon lively music filled the air. Russell arrived at the boarding house promptly at 6, wearing clean trousers and a white shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders. He had shaved and slicked his hair back with water, and Catherine felt a flutter in her chest at the sight of him. She had chosen her best dress, a green cotton that brought out her eyes and fit her slim figure well. Mrs. Henley had helped her pin up her hair in a style that was both fashionable and modest, with a few dark curls left to frame her face. "You look beautiful," Russell said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Catherine blush. At the barn, Russell introduced her to what seemed like half the town. There was his business partner, a gruff older man named Tom Sullivan, who ran the ranch when Russell was in town. There were neighboring ranchers and their wives, shopkeepers, the school teacher, the minister and his family, and a steady stream of others whose names Catherine struggled to remember. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, eager to know about the new arrival. Catherine stuck to her practice story. She had grown up in Sacramento, lost her parents to fever 2 years prior, and had decided to seek her fortune further north. The lies came easier now, smooth and believable, and only occasionally did she feel a pang of guilt at deceiving these kind people. Russell stayed close to her side throughout the evening, his presence a steady anchor as she navigated the social currents. When the dancing started, he led her to the floor for a lively reel that left them both breathless and laughing. "You dance well, Miss Kane," Russell said as they moved through the steps. "My mother insisted I learn. She said it was a necessary skill for any young lady. Your mother was wise." As the evening wore on, Catherine found herself relaxing in ways she had not since fleeing Sacramento. The music, the laughter, the simple pleasure of moving in rhythm with a partner all combined to lift the weight she carried, at least temporarily. Russell was an attentive companion, bringing her punch when she was thirsty, making her laugh with stories about difficult horses and stubborn cattle. During a slower song, he held her closer, and Katherine allowed it, savoring the feeling of strong arms around her and the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. It had been so long since anyone had held her, since she had felt safe enough to let down her guard even a fraction. "I am glad you came tonight," Russell said softly, his breath warm against her hair. "So am I," Katherine admitted, and it was the truest thing she had said in weeks. When Russell walked her home that night, they took the long route, neither wanting the evening to end. The moon was nearly full, painting the streets in silver light, and the air smelled of wood smoke and coming winter. At the door to the boarding house, Russell took her hand gently. "Might I see you again? Maybe take you to supper at the hotel restaurant." Katherine knew she should refuse. Every day she stayed in Oregon City, every connection she formed made it harder to leave when the time came. But looking up at Russell's hopeful face, she found she could not deny him or herself. "I would like that." His smile was radiant. "How about Tuesday evening? I could pick you up at 6. "Tuesday at 6, Katherine agreed. Russell lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the gesture both old-fashioned and intimate. "Good night, Katherine. Thank you for a wonderful evening." "Good night, Russell." She slipped inside before she could do something foolish, like kiss him, and stood with her back against the door for several minutes, heart pounding and mind racing. She was playing a dangerous game, allowing Russell Parker to court her when she had no future to offer him. The right thing would be to end it now, to pack her bags and slip away in the night before anyone got hurt. But Katherine was tired of running, tired of being alone, tired of carrying her burden in solitude. And Russell made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could be someone other than a frightened fugitive. Over the following weeks, Russell courted Katherine with a determination and sincerity that melted her defenses bit by bit. He took her to dinners and walks along the river. He introduced her to his ranch, a sprawling property with a comfortable house and well-tended pastures where cattle grazed and horses ran. He showed her the foals born that spring, now growing leggy and bold, and the garden his mother had planted before her death 5 years prior that he still tended in her memory. Katherine learned that Russell had been raised on this land, the only child of parents who had traveled the Oregon Trail in 1847 as newlyweds, seeking opportunity in the West. His father had died from a kick to the head by a horse when Russell was 19, leaving him to run the ranch with help from Tom Sullivan, his father's oldest friend. His mother had followed 3 years later, worn out by hard work and grief. "Sometimes I think about selling it all, moving somewhere easier," Russell confessed one afternoon as they sat on his porch watching the sun set over the hills. "But then I remember all the work they put into this place, all their dreams that are built into every fence post and barn beam. I cannot just walk away from that." Katherine understood that kind of loyalty, that sense of obligation to the past. She had felt it herself once before everything had fallen apart. "They would be proud of you, of what you have built here." Russell looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I want to build more, Katherine, not just the ranch, but a life, a family." The implication hung in the air between them, and Katherine felt panic rise in her chest. She stood abruptly, moving to the edge of the porch. "Russell, I cannot." He was beside her in an instant, not touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I am not asking you to decide anything right now. I just want you to know my intentions are serious. You are not some passing fancy to me, Katherine Kane." "You do not know me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not really. Then let me know you, let me in." But that was exactly what Katherine could not do. To let Russell in meant revealing the truth, and the truth would destroy whatever was growing between them. He was an honest, honorable man, and she was a liar and a killer. There could be no future for them, no matter how much her heart yearned for one. Winter came to Oregon City with cold rain that turned the streets to mud and kept people indoors for days at a time. Katherine continued working at the dress shop, her skilled fingers creating beautiful garments for the town's wives and daughters. She had moved beyond simple alterations to designing and sewing complete dresses, and Mrs. Crawford praised her work effusively. The money was good, better than Katherine had expected, and she found herself setting aside a portion each week not for her eventual flight but for something else, something she barely dared name. A future, perhaps. A home. Russell was patient, never pushing her further than she was willing to go, but his courtship continued steadily. He brought her small gifts, a book of poetry, a pair of warm gloves as the weather turned cold, a wooden carving of a horse he had whittled during long winter evenings. Katherine treasured each item, storing them carefully in her room like precious secrets. They spent Christmas together, attending services at the church, and then joining other townspeople for a communal feast. Russell gave her a silver locket that had belonged to his mother, and Katherine felt tears stream down her face as he fastened it around her neck. "I cannot accept this," she protested weakly. "It is too precious." "You are precious," Russell said simply, "and I want you to have it." Katherine gave him a scarf she had knitted during the long evenings alone, her first attempt at the craft resulting in something slightly lopsided but warm and serviceable. Russell wore it constantly, claiming it was the finest scarf ever made, and Katherine's heart swelled with an emotion she was afraid to name. As winter deepened into January of 1879, Katherine found herself thinking less about running and more about staying. The nightmares that had plagued her first weeks in Oregon City came less frequently. She began to imagine a life here, a real life with Russell and the ranch and maybe even children someday. It was a dangerous dream, built on a foundation of lies, but it was so seductive she could not quite let it go. Then, on a frigid afternoon in late January, her carefully constructed world began to crumble. Katherine was working alone in the dress shop, Mrs. Crawford having left early to tend to a sick grandchild, when the door opened and two men entered. They wore badges on their chests and grim expressions on their weathered faces. "Can I help you?" Katherine asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror flooding through her. The taller of the two men, middle-aged with a thick mustache, studied her carefully. "We are looking for a woman who might have passed through here back in September. Dark hair, green eyes, about your age. She was traveling alone on a stolen horse." Katherine's hands stilled on the dress she was mending. "Many people pass through Oregon City. Can you be more specific?" "Her name is Katherine Kane. She is wanted for murder in California." The words hung in the air like smoke. Katherine forced herself to continue sewing to keep her expression neutral. "I have not heard that name, but I only arrived in September myself, and I keep to myself mostly." The second man, younger and nervous, glanced at his partner. "What did you say your name was, miss?" "I did not." "But it is Katherine Kane." The lie came smoothly, a name close enough to her real one that she might respond to it naturally. "I work here at Mrs. Crawford's shop." "Where did you come from?" the older marshal asked. "Portland originally. Came down here looking for work." The marshal's eyes narrowed. "You mind if we ask Mrs. Crawford about you?" "Not at all. Though she has gone home for the day, you could speak with her tomorrow." The marshals exchanged a look, and Katherine felt her heart hammering so hard she was certain they could hear it. Finally, the older man nodded. "We will do that. Thank you for your time, Miss Kane." After they left, Katherine sat frozen for several minutes, her mind racing. They were looking for her. They had tracked her this far, and it was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots. Mrs. Crawford knew her real name, as did Russell and Mrs. Henley. The lies she had told today would fall apart under the slightest scrutiny. She had to run. Tonight. Now. Katherine closed up the shop with shaking hands and hurried through the muddy streets to the boarding house. She would pack her few belongings, withdraw the money she had saved, and disappear before anyone could stop her. Maybe she could make it to Seattle or across the border into Canada, somewhere far enough away that the law could not reach. But when she reached the boarding house, Russell was waiting on the porch, sheltering from the rain under the overhang. His face lit up when he saw her, and Katherine felt her heart break into pieces. "Katherine, I was hoping to catch you. I know it is miserable weather, but I thought maybe we could have supper at the hotel, warm ourselves up with some hot food." "I cannot tonight, Russell, I am sorry." She tried to move past him, but he caught her arm gently. "What is wrong? You are shaking." "Nothing. I am just cold and tired." Russell studied her face, and she saw the exact moment he realized she was lying. "Katherine, talk to me. Whatever it is, we can work through it." She pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. "You cannot help me, Russell. No one can. Let me try." The genuine concern in his voice nearly undid her. Katherine glanced around, making sure they were alone, then said quietly, "2 marshals came to the shop today. They are looking for someone, looking for me." Russell's expression did not change. "What did you do?" "I killed a man," Katherine whispered, the words tumbling out after months of silence. "In Sacramento last summer. He attacked me, tried to force himself on me, and I fought back. I grabbed a pitchfork and I killed him. Then I ran." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the drumming of rain on the roof. Katherine waited for Russell's face to fill with disgust, for him to call for the marshals, for everything to end. Instead, he asked, "Was it self-defense?" "Yes. But he was important, connected. His brother was my employer, a wealthy man with influence. No one would have believed me over him. They would have hanged me." Russell was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed this information. Finally, he said, "Come with me. We need to talk somewhere private." He led her not to the hotel but back to the livery stable, now closed for the evening and blessedly empty. In the small office where he kept his records and accounts, Russell lit a lamp and gestured for Katherine to sit. Then he paced the small space, running his hands through his damp hair. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked finally. "Would you have believed me? Would you have wanted anything to do with me if you knew?" "Yes," Russell said without hesitation. "Katherine, I have been half in love with you since the day you stumbled into town looking like a scared rabbit. Learning that you defended yourself against some bastard who tried to hurt you does not change that." Katherine felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I lied to you. About my name, about where I came from, about everything. Your name is not Katherine Kane. It is. I told the marshals it was Katherine Kane, but that was a lie." Russell stopped pacing and knelt in front of her chair, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "Katherine, listen to me. I do not care about the lies. I understand why you told them, but running again is not the answer. I have no choice. If I stay, they will arrest me. They will take me back to California and hang me. Not if we get ahead of this. Not if we tell the truth, the whole truth, to people who will listen." Katherine shook her head desperately. "No one will listen. I am nobody, Russell. Just a woman with no family, no money, no standing. Who is going to believe my word against a dead man and his powerful brother?" "I will," Russell said fiercely. "And others will too. Oregon City is not California, Katherine. We have a fair judge here and a sheriff who cares about justice. Let me help you. Let me stand beside you and fight this." "Why?" Katherine asked through her tears. Why would you risk everything for me? Russell reached up and cupped her face gently, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Because I love you, Katherine Kane. Because you are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met, and I will not let them punish you for surviving. The words broke something open inside Katherine, and she found herself sobbing in earnest, all the fear and grief and loneliness of the past months pouring out in great wrenching waves. Russell pulled her into his arms and held her, murmuring soothing words and stroking her hair until the storm passed. When she could finally speak again, Katherine pulled back and looked into his face. I chose survival over honesty once, she confessed softly, her voice raw. I have been running and lying ever since. I do not know how to stop. Russell smiled, and it was the gentlest thing she had ever seen. You are honest enough for me, and starting now we face this together. No more running, no more lying. Just the truth and faith that things will work out as they should. Katherine wanted to believe him. She wanted it so desperately it hurt, but years of hardship had taught her not to trust in happy endings. What if it does not work? What if they take me anyway? Then I will come with you. I will find the best lawyer money can buy, and I will fight for you until my last breath. You are not alone anymore, Katherine. You have me. Looking into his steady brown eyes, Katherine finally allowed herself to believe. Maybe it was foolish, maybe it was naive, but for the first time since that terrible day in Sacramento, she felt a flicker of hope. All right, she whispered. We do this together. Russell sealed the promise with a kiss, gentle and sweet, and full of such tenderness that Katherine felt her broken heart begin to knit itself back together. The next morning, Russell accompanied Katherine to speak with Sheriff Marcus Finn, a fair-minded man in his 40s who had earned the respect of Oregon City through years of impartial service. They found him in his office, a spare room attached to the small jail, drinking coffee and reviewing wanted posters. Russell, Miss Kane, he greeted them, rising politely. What can I do for you folks? Russell squeezed Katherine's hand encouragingly, and she forced herself to speak. Sheriff, I need to report a crime. My real name is Katherine Kane, and I am wanted in California for killing a man named Harold Whitmore. Sheriff Finn's expression sharpened, but he gestured for them to sit. The marshals who came through yesterday are looking for you. I know. I lied to them when they questioned me, but I cannot run anymore. I need to tell someone the truth. Over the next hour, Katherine laid out the whole story. She explained about her position in the Whitmore household, about Harold's escalating harassment, about the night he cornered her in the stables. She described the attack in painful detail, the fear and desperation, the split-second decision that had ended a life and destroyed hers. Russell sat beside her throughout, his presence a solid anchor, occasionally squeezing her hand or offering a quiet word of encouragement. Sheriff Finn listened without interruption, his weathered face giving nothing away. When Katherine finished, she sat back, exhausted and empty. I know how it sounds. I know I have no proof, no witnesses, but it is the truth. Sheriff Finn was quiet for a long moment, then leaned forward. Miss Kane, those marshals are staying at the hotel. They plan to question more folks today, including Mrs. Crawford. Once they confirm your real name, they will come for you with an arrest warrant. Katherine nodded, having expected as much. I understand. However, the sheriff continued, Oregon is a long way from California, and we have certain legal processes here that must be followed. If you turn yourself in voluntarily, it shows good faith. And if I have concerns about whether you will receive fair treatment in California, I can hold you here while we investigate further. Russell leaned forward. What kind of investigation? I can wire the authorities in Sacramento. Ask questions about this Harold Whitmore and his brother. Find out if there were other complaints about Harold, other incidents. Miss Kane, you say he had been harassing you for months. Stands to reason you might not have been his first victim. A spark of hope flared in Katherine's chest. You believe me? Sheriff Finn's expression softened slightly. I have been doing this job long enough to recognize when someone is telling the truth. Your story is consistent, detailed, and you came to me voluntarily even though you could have run again. That speaks to your character, Miss Kane. What happens now? Russell asked. Now, I take Miss Kane into protective custody. Not arrest, mind you, but custody for her own safety. Then I send some telegrams, talk to those marshals, and see what I can find out. With luck, we can get this sorted without dragging you back to California at all. Katherine felt Russell's hand tighten on hers. How long might that take? Could be days, could be weeks. Depends on how cooperative folks are on the other end. Sheriff Finn stood, moving to a cabinet where he kept his official papers. Miss Kane, I need you to write out a full statement, everything you told me and more. Every detail you can remember. Russell, you might want to wire Judge Morrison over in Portland. He has experience with extradition cases, and if this goes to a hearing, you will want good representation. Over the next several hours, Katherine wrote until her hand cramped, documenting everything from her arrival in the Whitmore household to her flight north. Sheriff Finn read through the statement carefully, asked clarifying questions, and had her sign and date each page. By early afternoon, word had spread through town that Katherine Kane was in protective custody at the sheriff's office. Mrs. Crawford arrived in a flurry of indignation, declaring that Katherine was the best employee she had ever had and clearly a good Christian woman who would never commit murder without cause. Mrs. Henley came next, followed by several women Katherine had befriended at church socials, all offering support and character references. Russell never left her side, even when Sheriff Finn suggested he might want to return to his business. My place is here, Russell said firmly, and Katherine felt a wave of gratitude so intense it threatened to overwhelm her. The marshals arrived late in the afternoon, their expressions grim when they learned Katherine had turned herself in. The older marshal, who introduced himself as Marshal Frank Davies, read through Katherine's statement with narrowed eyes. This is quite a tale, Miss Kane, he said when he finished. It is the truth, Marshal, so you say, but we have a warrant for your arrest, signed by a judge in Sacramento. Harold Whitmore's brother swore out a complaint saying you murdered Harold in cold blood and robbed him. Russell stood, his voice hard. And Katherine says it was self-defense. You planning to take her word into account at all, or just his? Marshal Davies bristled. I do not appreciate your tone, Mr. Parker. This is a legal matter. It is a matter of justice, Russell countered, and right now I am not seeing much of that. Sheriff Finn stepped between them, his voice calm but authoritative. Gentlemen, let us all take a breath. Marshal Davies, you have a warrant, and that is legal and proper. But Miss Kane is currently in my custody, and Oregon law allows me to investigate concerns about her receiving fair treatment if extradited. I have already sent telegrams to Sacramento requesting information about Harold Whitmore's history. Until I receive responses, Miss Kane stays here. That is not how this works, Sheriff. Actually, Marshal, it is exactly how this works in my jurisdiction. You are welcome to wire your superiors and confirm that if you like. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut, but finally, Marshal Davies nodded curtly. I will give you 3 days, Sheriff. After that, with or without your cooperation, we are taking her back to California. After the marshals left, Katherine sagged in her chair, exhausted. Russell knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You did so well, Katherine. I am proud of you. "I am terrified," she admitted. "I know, but you are not alone." Sheriff Finn cleared his throat. "Miss Kane, I am going to have to put you in a cell for the night. It is not that I do not trust you, but if those marshals come back and find you just sitting in my office, they will raise hell. A cell shows I am taking this seriously." Katherine nodded, understanding the politics involved. The cell was small but clean, with a narrow cot and a single barred window that let in the afternoon light. It was nothing like what she had feared during her months on the run, no dank dungeon or filthy cage. Still, the clang of the door closing sent a chill through her. Russell stayed until the sheriff insisted he had to close the office for supper. "I will be back first thing tomorrow," he promised, reaching through the bars to hold Katherine's hand. "And I am going to send that telegram to Judge Morrison tonight. Russell, this could take everything you have. Your money, your reputation, your time. Are you sure?" He smiled, that gentle smile that made her heart ache. "Katherine, you are everything I have that matters, I am sure." That night, alone in the cell, Katherine did not have nightmares. Instead, she slept more soundly than she had in months, as though the simple act of telling the truth had lifted a weight she had not realized she was carrying. The next days were a blur of activity. Judge Morrison arrived from Portland, a distinguished man with silver hair and a sharp legal mind. He interviewed Katherine extensively, taking copious notes and asking pointed questions about California law and the circumstances of Harold's death. "Your case is not as hopeless as you might think," he told her after their second meeting. "California has been evolving its standards around self-defense, particularly for women defending against sexual assault. The challenge is proving that was the circumstance." "How do we do that?" Katherine asked. "We find other victims. We establish a pattern of behavior. We show that Harold Whitmore was exactly the kind of man who would corner a defenseless woman in a stable." Judge Morrison tapped his notes thoughtfully. "Sheriff Finn's telegrams are a start, but I think we need to send investigators to Sacramento, talk to other household staff, gather witness statements." "I do not have money for that," Katherine said quietly. "I do," Russell interjected. He had been present for all the meetings, a constant presence at Katherine's side. "Whatever it costs, Judge, I want this done right." Over the following week, more information trickled in. Sheriff Finn received responses to his telegrams that painted a disturbing picture of Harold Whitmore. He had been dismissed from a banking position years earlier after complaints from female employees. There had been a hushed-up incident involving a maid at a hotel. Two women who had worked for the Whitmore household before Katherine came forward, writing cautiously that they too had been harassed and that they believed Katherine's account. Marshal Davies was unmoved. "Hearsay and gossip," he declared. "The warrant stands." But Judge Morrison filed an emergency motion with the territorial court, arguing that Katherine Kane should not be extradited until a full investigation could be conducted. The motion bought them time, though how much was unclear. Through it all, Russell was Katherine's rock. He brought her meals from the hotel, books to read, news of the town. He sat with her for hours, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for a future that might never come. "When this is over," he said one evening, his fingers laced through hers between the cell bars, "I want to marry you, Katherine Kane. I want to build that life with you, have children, grow old watching the sunset from our porch." Tears spilled down Katherine's cheeks. "You should not bind yourself to me. I might be convicted, might hang." "You will not," Russell said with absolute certainty. "I believe in you and I believe in justice, and when you walk out of here a free woman, I will be waiting with a ring and a proposal." "I love you," Katherine whispered. It was the first time she had said the words aloud, and they felt like truth, like absolution. Russell's face transformed with joy. "I love you too, more than I knew I could love anyone." 2 weeks after Katherine had turned herself in, a telegram arrived that changed everything. Judge Morrison read it aloud in Sheriff Finn's office, his voice ringing with satisfaction. "It is from a lawyer in Sacramento named Marcus Chen, representing 3 former employees of the Whitmore household. They are willing to testify that Harold Whitmore sexually harassed and assaulted multiple women over the course of several years. Furthermore, they have filed a civil suit against Theodore Whitmore, Harold's brother, alleging that he knew about the harassment and did nothing to stop it." Katherine felt her knees go weak, and Russell steadied her with an arm around her waist. "What does that mean?" Judge Morrison smiled. "It means we have corroboration of your story. It means a pattern of behavior that supports your claim of self-defense. And it means the political winds in Sacramento are shifting. Theodore Whitmore's reputation is taking a beating, and prosecutors generally do not like to pursue cases where the victim is looking more and more like the villain." Marshal Davies, who had been listening with a deepening scowl, shook his head. "I still have a warrant. A warrant that I suspect will be withdrawn very shortly," Judge Morrison countered. "But if you insist on proceeding, we will fight extradition in court, and I guarantee you we will win." Miss Kane acted in self-defense against a known predator, and any jury in Oregon will see that. The standoff lasted another tense moment before Marshal Davies threw up his hands. "This is not over, Sheriff. I will be reporting all of this to my superiors." "You do that, Marshal," Sheriff Finn said mildly. "I will be recommending to the territorial governor that Oregon decline to honor California's extradition request based on concerns about justice being served." After the marshals left, Katherine found herself surrounded by people who had become, against all odds, her champions. Sheriff Finn, Judge Morrison, Russell, even Mrs. Crawford, who had closed her shop to attend the meeting. They were all smiling, all offering congratulations, but Katherine felt strangely numb. "Is it really over?" she asked Russell quietly. "Not quite yet, but we are close, Katherine, so close." The final resolution came 3 weeks later in early March of 1879. The prosecutor in Sacramento, facing mounting public pressure and damaging testimony about Harold Whitmore's history, withdrew the murder charges against Katherine Kane. In a terse official letter, he stated that, upon further investigation, evidence suggests the deceased may have provoked the altercation that led to his death. It was not an exoneration, not an apology, but it was freedom. Sheriff Finn personally unlocked Katherine's cell door on a bright spring morning, his weathered face creased in a genuine smile. "You are free to go, Miss Kane. No charges, no warrants, no restrictions." Katherine stepped out of the cell on trembling legs, and Russell was there immediately, sweeping her into his arms. She clung to him, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by relief and joy and disbelief. "It is over," Russell murmured into her hair. "You are safe. You are free." That evening, Russell took Katherine back to his ranch. She had spent so many weeks in that cell, watched spring arrive through a barred window, and now she stood on his porch breathing in the scent of apple blossoms and new grass. "I have something for you," Russell said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. He dropped to one knee, and Katherine's heart began to race. "Katherine Kane, I have loved you since the moment you stumbled into my life. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The ring was simple but lovely, a gold band with a small diamond that caught the light. Katherine looked at it, then at Russell's hopeful face, and felt the last of her fears melt away. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Russell, I will marry you." Russell stood and kissed her, deep and thorough, a kiss that tasted like promises and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he said, "I want to do this right. A proper wedding with the whole town invited. I want everyone to know that you are mine and I am yours." Katherine laughed, the sound bubbling up from a place of pure happiness. "Whatever you want. I just want to be with you." They married 6 weeks later, on a warm day in late April with wildflowers blooming across the hills. The ceremony was held at the church in Oregon City, with half the town in attendance. Katherine wore a dress she had made herself, white silk with intricate embroidery that had taken weeks to complete. Mrs. Crawford had wept when she first saw it, declaring it the finest work Katherine had ever done. Russell stood at the altar in a new suit, his hair neatly combed and his face shining with joy as Katherine walked down the aisle. There were no family members to give her away, but Sheriff Finn offered his arm, and Katherine accepted gratefully. This man had believed in her when she had no reason to hope, and she would always be grateful for his faith. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but when Russell said, "For better or worse, in sickness and health," Katherine heard the deeper promise beneath the words. He knew the worst of her, the darkest corners of her past, and he loved her anyway. He chose her anyway. The reception was held in the same barn where they had attended that first church social, and Katherine marveled at how much her life had changed in the months since. Then, she had been a frightened fugitive, certain she would hang for defending herself. Now, she was a bride, surrounded by friends and community, married to a man who loved her without reservation. Russell swept her into a waltz as the musicians played, and Katherine rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed. "Get used to it," Russell said, his voice warm with affection. "I plan to spend the rest of our lives making sure you are happy." They spent their wedding night at the ranch house, which Russell had spent weeks preparing. He had painted the bedroom, hung new curtains, even built Katherine a hope chest where she could store the quilts and linens she had been making. The bed was soft, the room filled with the scent of the lilacs he had cut and placed in vases around the space. Russell was gentle and patient, mindful that this was Katherine's first time. He took his time learning her body, kissing away her nervousness, murmuring words of love and reassurance until Katherine relaxed into his touch. When they finally joined together, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place, two separate people becoming one united whole. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Katherine's head on Russell's chest and his arms wrapped protectively around her. "I love you," she said softly. "I will spend the rest of my life showing you how much." "I love you too," Russell replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You and me, Katherine, forever." Life as Mrs. Parker was both easier and harder than Katherine had anticipated. The physical labor of ranch life was demanding, from tending the garden to helping with the horses to cooking meals for Russell and Tom Sullivan, and the seasonal workers they hired during roundups. But it was also deeply satisfying, building something tangible with her own hands, watching things grow and thrive under her care. Russell was an attentive husband, never failing to kiss her goodbye in the mornings or hello in the evenings, always ready with a word of praise or encouragement. They worked side by side during the days and fell into bed exhausted at night. But even in their tiredness, they found time for tenderness, for whispered conversations and gentle touches. Katherine continued her sewing, taking commissions from women in town, and using the money to buy little luxuries for the house. Good china, soft blankets, books for the small library they were building in the parlor. She felt herself putting down roots for the first time in her life, becoming part of the community in ways that went beyond mere survival. That summer, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, her monthly courses absent and her body feeling strange and tender, but she waited until she was certain before telling Russell. She chose a quiet evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set, and simply took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. Russell's eyes widened, then filled with tears. Truly, truly. I think sometime in late winter, maybe early February. He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight Katherine could barely breathe, but she did not protest. She could feel him trembling, could feel the overwhelming emotion pouring off him in waves. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Katherine asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Russell said, pulling back to look at her face. "Katherine, you have given me everything. A partner, a love, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine suffered from terrible nausea in the early months, barely able to keep food down and losing weight that worried both Russell and the doctor. But as she moved into her second trimester, the sickness faded and was replaced by boundless energy, and a sense of well-being unlike anything she had ever experienced. Russell was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worried that Katherine was doing too much or working too hard. She finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not fragile, and that she needed to stay active for her own sanity and health. "I just want to take care of you," Russell said, looking like a chastised puppy. Katherine softened, taking his face in her hands. "You do take care of me, every single day, but I also need to feel useful to contribute. Let me work within my limits, and I promise I will ask for help when I need it." They compromised, with Katherine taking on lighter tasks and Russell doing the heavy lifting. As her belly swelled with their growing child, Katherine found herself marveling at the miracle of it all. Just over a year ago, she had been a fugitive, alone and terrified, certain her life was over. Now she was surrounded by love, building a family, looking toward a future bright with possibility. Winter came again, and with it the final weeks of Katherine's pregnancy. She grew huge and uncomfortable, unable to see her own feet and constantly shifting to find a comfortable position. Russell rubbed her aching back and swollen ankles, brought her endless cups of tea, and talked to her belly about all the things he wanted to teach their child. "First, how to ride," he said one evening, his large hand spread across Katherine's abdomen. "Then how to rope and how to shoot. The important things. What if it is a girl?" Katherine asked, amused. "Then I will teach her to ride and rope and shoot, and also how to sew and cook and whatever else she wants to learn. Our daughter will be able to do anything she sets her mind to." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, hormones making her emotional. "You are going to be such a good father." "I have a good example to follow," Russell said, his voice soft with memory. "My pa was patient and kind, always had time to explain things. I want to be like that for our children." "Children, plural," Katherine teased. Russell grinned, kissing her soundly. "As many as you are willing to give me, Mrs. Parker." Their son was born on a cold February night in 1880 after 12 hours of hard labor that left Katherine exhausted and wrung out. Dr. Henderson, the town physician, delivered the baby with calm efficiency while Russell held Katherine's hand and murmured encouragement. The moment she heard her baby's first cry, strong and lusty, Katherine felt something shift in her chest. When the doctor placed the tiny, wrinkled bundle in her arms, she looked down at her son's red face and shock of dark hair and fell completely, irrevocably in love. "He is perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Russell, sitting beside her on the bed, reached out a tentative finger to touch his son's tiny hand. The baby immediately grasped it, his grip surprisingly strong, and Russell made a choked sound. "He is amazing. You are amazing. Katherine, you did so well." They named him Robert Thomas Parker, after Russell's father and Tom Sullivan, who had become like family. Little Robert was a hungry, vocal baby who kept them up at all hours, but neither Katherine nor Russell minded. They took turns walking the floor with him during fussy nights, changing his cloths, marveling over every tiny feature. Katherine, who had never had much experience with babies, learned as she went. She nursed Robert, sang to him, watched him grow from a tiny newborn to a chubby infant with Russell's brown eyes and her dark hair. Every milestone felt like a miracle. His first smile, the first time he rolled over, the day he started sitting up on his own. Russell was a devoted father, constantly wanting to hold his son and play with him. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved wooden toys, and insisted on being present for baths and feedings whenever possible. Tom Sullivan teased him mercilessly about being soft, but Katherine saw the wistful look in the older man's eyes and knew he was remembering his own children, long grown and moved away. As Robert grew, so did the ranch. Russell expanded their cattle operation, bought more land, hired additional hands. Katherine managed the household and the accounts, her neat figures keeping track of expenses and income. They were prospering in ways neither had quite expected, and with that prosperity came security and peace of mind. On Robert's first birthday, they hosted a party at the ranch, inviting everyone who had supported them through the difficult early days. Sheriff Finn came, now retired but still a presence in town. Judge Morrison sent a gift from Portland along with his regrets that business kept him away. Mrs. Crawford and Mrs. Henley both attended, cooing over Robert and marveling at how much he had grown. That night, after everyone had left and Robert was sleeping soundly in his cradle, Katherine and Russell sat on the porch watching the stars. "Do you ever think about that first night we met?" Russell asked, his arm around Katherine's shoulders. "All the time. I was so scared, so certain everything was falling apart. And now," Katherine smiled, leaning into her husband's warmth, "now I know that sometimes things have to fall apart so they can come back together in a better way. I never would have found this life if I had not run that night in Sacramento." "I have been thinking about that," Russell said slowly. "About what you went through, how you survived. I want to make sure Robert knows that story when he is older." Katherine tensed. "Why would we tell him?" "It is not something to be proud of." "That is where you are wrong," Russell said firmly. "It is absolutely something to be proud of. You defended yourself against someone who would have hurt you. You had the courage to run, to build a new life, and when you had no more running left in you, you stood your ground and told the truth. That is strength, Katherine. That is bravery, and I want our son to know his mother is the bravest person I have ever met." Fresh tears spilled down Katherine's cheeks. After all this time, Russell could still surprise her with the depth of his love and understanding. "What if he thinks less of me?" "He will not. He will understand that sometimes survival requires difficult choices, and that you chose to live when someone tried to take that choice away from you. That is a lesson worth teaching." Over the following years, the Parker family continued to grow and thrive. Katherine gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Grace when Robert was 3, and then another son, Daniel James, 2 years after that. The house that had once felt too large for 2 people was suddenly filled with the noise and chaos of children. Toys scattered across the floor, little voices calling for Mama and Papa, the constant motion of small bodies running and playing. Russell expanded the house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Katherine planted flower gardens around the porch and taught her children to read using the books she had collected over the years. They attended church every Sunday, hosted barn dances in the summer, and celebrated every holiday with friends and neighbors. Robert grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses and spent every spare moment in the stables with his father. Emma was her mother's daughter, preferring needlework and cooking but also fierce and independent, quick to defend her brothers if anyone teased them. Daniel was the baby, sweet-natured and affectionate, always underfoot and asking endless questions about everything. Katherine sometimes looked at her life and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. She had a husband who loved her, children who filled her days with purpose and joy, a home that was truly hers. The frightened woman who had fled Sacramento seemed like someone from another lifetime, a ghost she barely recognized. But she never forgot the lessons of those dark days. She taught her children to stand up for themselves, to defend those who could not defend themselves, to always choose truth over convenience. And when Robert was 12 years old enough to understand, she sat him down and told him the full story of how she had come to Oregon City. Robert listened in silence, his young face serious as Katherine recounted the attack, her flight, her months as a fugitive. She did not spare herself, explaining the lies she had told and the fear that had driven her. When she finished, she held her breath, waiting for his reaction. "So you killed someone," Robert said finally. "Yes, in self-defense, but yes." "Good," Robert said fiercely. "He deserved it for trying to hurt you." Katherine felt a weight lift from her chest. "Your father said you would understand. Pa is usually right about things." Robert hesitated, then asked, "Were you scared, terrified, every day for months, until I met your father and finally told the truth?" "I am glad you did," Robert said simply. "Otherwise we would not be here." It was such a pragmatic observation, so much like something Russell would say, that Katherine had to laugh. She pulled her son into a hug, marveling at how tall he had grown, and whispered, "I love you so much. Love you too, Ma." The years continued to pass, measured in harvests and birthdays, in calves born and horses trained, in children growing and maturing. Russell's hair began to show threads of silver at the temples, and Katherine found faint lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. But they were happy lines, earned through laughter and love, and she wore them with pride. When Robert turned 18, Russell made him a full partner in the ranch, recognizing his son's hard work and dedication. Emma, at 15, announced her intention to become a teacher and began studying with the schoolmaster in town. Daniel, at 13, was still figuring out his path but showed a talent for drawing and often spent hours sketching the ranch, the animals, and his family. On a warm evening in June of 1896, Katherine and Russell celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner on the porch. The children were old enough now to fend for themselves for an evening, and Katherine had prepared Russell's favorite meal: roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots from their garden, followed by apple pie made from fruit off their own trees. 17 years, Russell said, raising his glass of wine in a toast. "Best 17 years of my life." "Mine too," Katherine agreed, clinking her glass against his. "Though I never would have predicted this life when I first arrived in Oregon City." "Scared, alone, riding a stolen horse," Russell recalled with a smile. "I took one look at you and knew you were going to change my life." "You saved my life," Katherine corrected. "If you had not believed in me, had not stood beside me, I would have hanged." Russell reached across the table to take her hand. "We saved each other, Katherine. You gave me purpose, family, love. You made this ranch into a home. I was just going through the motions before you arrived." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, they could hear Robert working with a young horse in the corral, his patient voice carrying on the evening breeze. "I have been thinking," Russell said eventually, "about legacy, about what we leave behind. This ranch will go to the children someday, and I know they will take care of it, but I want to do something more, something that matters beyond just our family." "What did you have in mind?" "A fund," Russell said, his enthusiasm building. "A legal defense fund for women who have to defend themselves against violence, so they do not have to face what you faced, alone and terrified with no resources." Katherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Russell, that is wonderful, but it will take considerable money." "We have considerable money," Russell pointed out. "The ranch is doing well, we have savings, and I think it is important." "What do you think?" Katherine thought about the other women out there, facing situations like the one she had endured. Women who might not be as lucky, who might not find a Russell Parker to stand beside them. "I think it is the best idea you have ever had. Let me help. We can do this together." Over the following months, they worked with Judge Morrison, now semi-retired but still active in legal circles, to establish the Parker Defense Fund. They contributed a substantial portion of their savings and began fundraising among their community. The response was overwhelming, with people throughout Oregon contributing money and support. The fund's first case came within 6 months. A young woman in Salem who had killed her abusive husband in self-defense. The Parker Fund paid for her legal representation, and she was acquitted by a jury that heard the full truth of her situation. Katherine attended the trial, sitting in the courtroom and remembering her own terror, and when the verdict was read, she wept with relief and joy. More cases followed over the years. The Parker Defense Fund became known throughout the Northwest as a resource for women with nowhere else to turn. Katherine became personally involved, writing letters of support, attending trials when she could, and sharing her own story when it might help others find the courage to come forward. Russell supported her completely, never begrudging the time or money spent on this cause that had become her passion. "This is important work," he said whenever she thanked him. "You are helping people who need it most. I could not be prouder of you." As they moved into their later years, Katherine and Russell settled into a comfortable rhythm. Robert married a sweet girl from town named Sarah and gave them 3 grandchildren who filled the ranch house with noise and laughter. Emma became a teacher as she had planned and married a fellow teacher, choosing to remain in Oregon City. Daniel pursued his art, eventually moving to Portland to study, but returning home frequently to visit. Katherine and Russell grew old together, their hair silver, their steps slower, but their love as strong as ever. They sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, watching grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once played, and reminisced about the unlikely journey that had brought them together. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked one evening. "Taking a chance on a desperate woman with a dark past?" Russell looked at her, his brown eyes still warm and kind despite the lines that surrounded them. "Not for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Katherine Parker. You and our family, this life we built together. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Katherine reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "I chose survival over honesty once," she said softly, echoing words from so long ago. "But you taught me that I could be honest and still survive. That I could be fully myself and be loved anyway." "You are honest enough for me," Russell replied, just as he had all those years ago. "Always have been, always will be." They sat together as the sun set, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. The Parker Ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to their hard work and dedication. But more than that, it was a testament to love, to second chances, to the power of choosing truth over fear. In the house behind them, they could hear their grandchildren laughing as Sarah prepared supper. The smell of cooking food drifted through the open windows, mingling with the scent of roses from Catherine's garden. A horse whinnied in the distance, and cattle lowed as they settled for the night. It was an ordinary evening, unremarkable in its routine, and yet Katherine felt her heart swell with gratitude for every single moment. She had survived when survival seemed impossible. She had found love when she believed herself unlovable. She had built a family and a life that exceeded every dream she had ever dared to dream. "Thank you," she whispered to Russell, though she was not entirely sure what she was thanking him for believing in her, for standing beside her, for loving her despite everything. Russell seemed to understand anyway, as he always did. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for choosing to trust me, for giving me the gift of your honesty, your strength, your love. You made me a better man, Katherine." "You made me a free woman," Katherine replied. "In every way that matters." As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge overhead, Katherine and Russell remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full. Behind them lay a past marked by violence and fear, by running and hiding. But they had faced that past together, transformed it into something meaningful, and emerged stronger for the struggle. Before them lay whatever time remained, days or years or decades, and they would face that future together as well. Side by side, hand in hand, two people who had chosen each other when choice seemed impossible, who had built love from the ruins of trauma and despair. The Wild West that Katherine had fled to in terror had become her home, and the cowboy who had offered her shelter had become her partner in every sense of the word. Their story, which had begun with blood and flight, had evolved into something beautiful and lasting, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Inside the house, a grandchild called out for grandmother Katherine, and she reluctantly released Russell's hand to go see what was needed. But even as she rose, she knew she would return to this spot, to this man, to this life they had created together. Because this was where she belonged, where she had always been meant to be. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes both large and small to the Parker family and to Oregon City itself. The turn of the century arrived with celebrations and a sense of new possibilities. By then, Katherine and Russell were in their 70s, their bodies worn but their spirits still strong. Robert ran the ranch now with efficiency and dedication, while Sarah managed the household and raised their growing family. Emma's teaching career had touched hundreds of young lives, and Daniel's paintings were being exhibited in galleries throughout the Northwest. The Parker Defense Fund had helped dozens of women, saving lives and securing justice where it had previously been denied. Katherine's health began to decline in 1902, a lingering cough that would not go away and an exhaustion that no amount of rest seemed to cure. Dr. Henderson, now ancient himself but still practicing, diagnosed her with consumption and gave her perhaps a year, maybe 2 if she was careful. Katherine received the news with surprising calm. She had lived a full life, had loved and been loved, had made a difference in the world. If her time was coming to an end, she could accept that. But Russell, sitting beside her when the doctor delivered his verdict, looked like he had been struck. "There must be something we can do," he insisted. "Some treatment, some cure." Dr. Henderson shook his head sadly. "I am sorry, Russell. Make her comfortable, keep her warm and well-fed, and treasure whatever time you have left." After the doctor left, Russell pulled Katherine into his arms and held her as if he could keep death at bay through sheer force of will. "I cannot lose you," he said, his voice breaking. "Katherine, I cannot do this without you." "You can," Katherine said gently, though her own heart was breaking. "You are the strongest man I know, Russell Parker, and you will not be alone. You have our children, our grandchildren, a whole community that loves you." "But I want you," Russell said simply, and Katherine had no answer for that because she wanted to stay too, wanted more years with this man who had become the center of her world. She spent her remaining time putting her affairs in order, writing letters to her children and grandchildren that they would open after she was gone, documenting her recipes and household wisdom so it would not be lost. She spent long afternoons with Russell, talking about their life together, remembering the good times and even finding humor in some of the difficult ones. "Remember when you first asked me to that church social?" Katherine said one day, both of them bundled in blankets on the porch despite the summer warmth. "I was so frightened, so certain I should say no. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even covered in trail dust and scared half to death," Russell replied. "I knew I had to get to know you, even if you turned me down." "Best decision I ever made, saying yes to you," Katherine said. "Best decision of my life." As fall arrived and the leaves began to turn, Katherine's condition worsened. She spent most days in bed now, too weak to do more than sit by the window and watch the ranch activity below. Her grandchildren visited constantly, climbing into bed beside her to hear stories about the old days, about how grandmother and grandfather had met and fallen in love. Katherine told them an edited version, appropriate for young ears, about a woman who had to run away to stay safe and a kind cowboy who helped her find her way home. The children listened with wide eyes, captivated by the romance of it all, not understanding that they were hearing their grandmother's final stories. On a cool October evening, with the first frost painting the windows white, Katherine felt her strength finally giving out. Russell sat beside her bed, holding her hand as he had held it through so many trials and triumphs. "I love you," Katherine whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for everything, for believing in me, for giving me this life." "I love you too," Russell said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You made my life worth living, Katherine. You were my everything." Katherine smiled, using the last of her strength to squeeze his hand. "No regrets," she said. "Not a single one." Those were her final words. She slipped away peacefully, her hand in Russell's, surrounded by love and the family she had created. The funeral was held on a sunny autumn day, with what seemed like the entire town turning out to pay their respects to Katherine Parker, who had touched so many lives through her kindness, her courage, and her dedication to helping others. Russell stood at the graveside, his children supporting him on either side, and watched as they lowered his beloved wife into the earth. He had known this day would come eventually, had tried to prepare himself for it, but nothing could truly prepare a man for losing his other half. In the months that followed, Russell moved through his days like a man walking through fog. He still worked the ranch, still spent time with his grandchildren, still attended church on Sundays. But there was a hollow place inside him where Katherine had been, an absence so profound it sometimes stole his breath. Robert worried about his father, as did Emma and Daniel. They tried to fill his hours with activities, with family gatherings and projects around the ranch. But Russell knew what he needed, and it was something no one could give him: more time with the woman he loved. He began spending his evenings on the porch, sitting in Katherine's rocking chair beside his own, talking to her as if she were still there. He told her about the grandchildren's latest antics, about ranch business, about the beauty of the sunset. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, he could almost hear her voice answering, feel her presence beside him. The Parker Defense Fund continued to thrive, a living memorial to Katherine's passion and compassion. Russell threw himself into the work, attending trials and writing letters of support, carrying on the mission that had meant so much to his wife. In helping others, he found purpose and a connection to Katherine that transcended death. Russell Parker lived for another 5 years after Katherine's death, years marked by both sorrow and satisfaction. He saw his grandchildren grow and thrive, welcomed several great-grandchildren, and watched the Parker Ranch continue to prosper under Robert's capable management. And through it all, he carried Katherine with him, her memory a constant companion. When Russell's own time came in the winter of 1907, it was peaceful, a quiet slipping away in his sleep. His children found him in the morning, still in his bed, a gentle smile on his face as if he had seen something beautiful in his final moments. They liked to think he had seen Katherine, waiting for him as she had always promised she would. Russell was buried beside his beloved wife, their graves marked by a single headstone that bore both their names and a simple inscription: "United in life, together in eternity." A love that conquered all. The Parker Ranch passed to Robert and his descendants, who continued to run it with the same dedication and integrity that Russell and Katherine had demonstrated. The Parker Defense Fund endured for decades, helping countless women find justice and safety. And the story of Katherine and Russell, the fugitive woman and the cowboy who loved her, became part of Oregon City legend, told and retold to new generations as an example of what true love could accomplish. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on that land, still tend those fields and pastures, still sit on that porch and watch the sun set over the hills. And sometimes, when the evening light is just right and the wind carries the scent of roses, they swear they can see 2 figures in rocking chairs, hands clasped, forever together in the home they built from courage, honesty, and unwavering love. Katherine Kane had fled to Oregon City seeking survival, carrying guilt and fear, and the weight of a secret that threatened to destroy her. But she had found something far more precious than mere survival. She had found redemption, purpose, family, and a love that had transformed her from a frightened fugitive into a woman of strength and conviction. And Russell Parker, the cowboy with kind eyes and a generous heart, had found his perfect match in a woman who had needed him as desperately as he had needed her. Together, they had proven that honesty could triumph over fear, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the most broken people could build the most beautiful lives. Their story, born from tragedy and terror, had become a testament to the power of second chances, to the strength found in choosing truth over expedience, and to the transformative force of love given freely and accepted completely. In the Wild West town of Oregon City, Oregon, in the late 1800s, 2 unlikely people had found each other against all odds and created something that would endure long after they were gone. A legacy of love, courage, and unwavering faith in the possibility of redemption. The generations that followed carried forward the values Katherine and Russell had embodied. The Parker family became known throughout Oregon not just for their successful ranch, but for their commitment to justice and fairness, particularly for those who had no voice. The family tradition of service continued, with Parker descendants becoming lawyers, judges, social workers, and advocates for the vulnerable. Every year on the anniversary of Katherine and Russell's wedding, the family gathered at the ranch for a celebration that honored not just the couple but the ideals they had lived by. Stories were shared, both serious and humorous, ensuring that new generations understood the journey their ancestors had taken and the sacrifices that had been made. The Parker Defense Fund evolved over time, eventually becoming a foundation that supported not just legal defense, but also shelters for women fleeing violence, educational programs about domestic abuse, and advocacy for legal reforms. By the time the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the foundation had helped thousands of women and their children find safety and justice. And through it all, Katherine and Russell's love story remained at the heart of the family's identity. It was a story that reminded them that people were more than their worst moments, that courage could be found in unexpected places, and that love, when given generously and honestly, had the power to change lives and leave a legacy that would endure for generations. In the end, Katherine Kane had not just survived. She had thrived, had loved, had built something meaningful from the ruins of tragedy. And Russell Parker had been her partner in every sense, the man who had seen her truth and loved her not despite it, but because of it. Together, they had created a life story that proved that sometimes, when everything seems lost, the greatest adventures and the deepest love are just beginning. Their graves remain in the Oregon City Cemetery, tended by family members who come to pay their respects and remember. Fresh flowers appear there regularly, and on warm summer evenings, visitors to the cemetery have reported seeing two shadows sitting together by the headstone, as if keeping each other company for eternity. Whether ghost story or wishful thinking, the image fits perfectly with what everyone knew about Katherine and Russell Parker. They were two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had chosen honesty and courage over fear and deception, and who had loved each other with a devotion that transcended even death itself. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy anyone can leave. A love so pure and true that it inspires others to believe in the possibility of their own happy endings, their own second chances, their own transformations from fear to courage, from loneliness to belonging, from mere survival to truly living. Katherine had confessed her truth softly, expecting rejection and judgment. Russell had responded with acceptance and love, seeing not a killer but a survivor, not a liar but a woman doing what she had to do to stay alive. And from that moment of radical acceptance, everything else had followed: trust, partnership, family, legacy. Theirs was a Wild West love story in the truest sense, full of danger and adventure, hardship and triumph. But it was also a deeply human story about two people finding each other in a harsh world and choosing to build something gentle and lasting together. In the end, that choice, made daily and reaffirmed constantly throughout their decades together, was the real adventure, the real triumph, the real happily ever after. And as the sun sets over the Parker Ranch even today, as it has for over a century, the land itself seems to whisper their story. Of Katherine Kane, who ran for her life and found it, and Russell Parker, who offered shelter and received love beyond measure. Two souls who met by chance, connected by choice, and remained together through everything life could throw at them, proving that sometimes, just sometimes, the Wild West could be gentle, justice could be found, and love really could conquer all.